Montana Territory, spring of 1877, the wind carried dust and judgment through the clapboard streets of Dalton Ridge the day they turned on her. Edda Albright stood in the center of the sheriff's office, her hands clenched, her voice raw. I saw him. I saw him take the girl. He rode east toward the ridge. Her eyes were wide, filled with certainty and panic. Sheriff Harland leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. That is a bold thing to say, Miss Albright. Especially when the man you are accusing is Reverend Caldwell's nephew. I do not care who he's kin to, she snapped. Delilah Moore is missing, and I saw him ride off with her. A murmur spread through the handful of townsfolk packed into the room. Edda caught the looks, some pitying, others sharp with suspicion. She had not belonged here since the day her father died and left her the crumbling homestead on the western edge of town. She had lived alone since, with only the company of her two young brothers, Dorian and Drew, who she had raised since their mother died of fever. She is just looking for attention, someone muttered behind her. She has always been strange, came another. Edda turned slowly, her face hardening. You think I would lie about a child being taken? Maybe you just saw what you wanted to see. Harland folded his arms. You have always been a little too quick to speak. Her cheeks flushed, tears stinging behind her eyes. You are all cowards. No one followed when she stormed out the door. The wind picked up as she crossed the street. She passed the saloon, the mercantile, the church. Doors closed, curtains shifted. She was marked now. Branded, she reached the edge of town and swung up onto her horse, a lean, tired gelding named Bramble. She had no plan, only fury and a single truth: Delilah had been taken, and Edda was the only one willing to do a damned thing about it. She rode hard toward the ridge. An hour later, she found the trail of hooves in the soft dirt near the cottonwoods. She followed it, heart pounding. She would find the girl. She had to. Just before dusk, a voice called out from behind a rise. You are riding too close to the canyon edge. Edda pulled Bramble to a stop and turned. A man approached on horseback, tall and lean, with a rifle across his back and a worn hat low over sharp eyes. His horse was a chestnut mare, better fed than Bramble, and she moved like she trusted her rider. I do not need your advice, Edda said, brushing hair from her face. Go back to town. I am not from Dalton Ridge, he said simply. She narrowed her eyes. Then what are you doing out here, looking for a lost girl? His voice was quiet but sure. Name's Fletcher Greaves. I was camped a few miles west when I heard about the girl gone missing, thought I would help. Edda stared at him, breath caught. You believe me? Fletcher looked her straight in the eyes. The town called you a liar. I just said I believe you. Her throat felt tight. Why? Because you are out here looking, and liars do not usually ride into trouble alone, she exhaled shakily. She was taken by Nathan Caldwell. I know it, Fletcher nodded once. Then let us find her. They made camp under the stars, the fire small and quiet. Fletcher offered her half his jerky and did not ask questions she was not ready to answer. Edda sat with her knees pulled close, watching the dark hills. You got family? He asked softly. 2 brothers. Dorian is 9. Drew is 6. I left them with Miss Cordy at the boarding house. He studied the fire. That is a lot to carry. I do not need pity. I was not offering any, he said. Just letting you know I see it. The silence stretched between them, not heavy, just real. Edda looked at him, then really looked. His face was weathered from sun and wind, but his eyes were kind and steady. She felt something shift inside her chest. By dawn, they were back in the saddle. Fletcher led them along a game trail that curved behind the ridge. They found signs, broken branches, a torn scrap of fabric snagged on a bush. She is close, Fletcher said. They rode quietly, cutting across a shallow stream and up a rise. At the top, Edda saw smoke in the distance. There, she breathed. They left their horses tethered in the trees and approached on foot. The cabin was small and half collapsed, hidden in a gully. Fletcher held up a hand, signaling her to wait. He moved around the side and peered through a crack in the boards, then he nodded. Edda followed him quietly. They slipped inside through the back. Delilah Moore sat tied to a chair, her dress torn, face streaked with dirt. Her eyes widened when she saw Edda. SHH, Edda whispered, rushing to her. We are getting you out. Suddenly, a plank creaked behind them. Nathan Caldwell stood in the doorway, pistol drawn, looking wild-eyed and unshaven. You should not have come here, he sneered. Edda froze, but Fletcher did not. In one swift move, he stepped in front of her, his rifle raised. Drop it. Nathan's hand twitched. Fletcher fired. The shot echoed through the canyon. Nathan dropped, the gun skidding from his fingers. Edda grabbed Delilah, cutting the ropes with Fletcher's knife. The girl sobbed, clinging to her. It is over, Edda whispered. You are safe now. They rode back slowly, Delilah on Fletcher's horse, wrapped in his coat. When they reached Dalton Ridge, people poured into the street. The sheriff looked stunned. You were telling the truth. Edda did not answer him. She just helped Delilah down and walked away, her head high. Fletcher followed her to the edge of town. I do not want to go back to that house, she said suddenly, stopping beside Bramble. Not tonight. You and your brothers can stay at my camp, he said. It is not much, but it is quiet. She looked up at him, and for the first time in a long while her expression softened. Thank you. He touched the brim of his hat. Anytime? That night under the stars, with her brothers asleep beside the fire and Delilah safe in Miss Cordy's care, Edda sat beside Fletcher. You really believed me, she said quietly. I did. She looked at him, her eyes shining. You are the only one who did. Fletcher reached over and took her hand. You have been alone too long. She did not pull away. Maybe I have, he smiled just a little. You are not anymore. And for the first time in years, Edda Albright believed that might actually be true. The sky held a pale hush the morning after, streaked with thin clouds and the softened weight of early spring light. Edda folded the worn quilt around Drew's shoulders as he stirred beside the coals. Dorian was already up, crouched near Fletcher's saddlebag, studying the way the man packed his canteen and cartridge belt with a fascination he didn't yet know how to hide. You always keep your knife on that side? Dorian asked. Fletcher nodded, cinching the strap. Keeps it away from my draw hand. I use it second if I need to. Dorian blinked, then nodded back like he understood. Edda watched them a moment before rising to pour water into the dented tin pot she'd found near Fletcher's pack. She hadn't asked to borrow it, but he hadn't said a word when she reached for it. No one had spoken much during the night, but the quiet hadn't pressed on her like before. She'd sat up long after the children slept, listening to the soft whistle of wind through the grass, the low breathing of horses nearby, and Fletcher's steady movements as he checked the perimeter. You always travel alone? She asked now, her voice low. Fletcher glanced over his shoulder. Most times. You from the north of here. Near the Judith River originally. My folks ran cattle there before the winter of '68 took most of them. She set the pot on the firestones and let the silence settle again. She didn't ask what happened to his family. She didn't need to. His voice had already told her. He crouched beside the fire and pulled a strip of salt pork from his bag, slicing it into the pan with a practiced hand. The sizzle filled the air. You planning to go back to town? He asked. Edda shook her head once. Not yet, he nodded, not pushing. I was thinking to ride up toward Bear Creek. Trails out that way are still soft. If Caldwell left anything behind, might be worth looking. You think he'd help? Fletcher tilted the pan, letting grease hiss against the edges. Wouldn't have picked that cabin unless someone told him about it. Roof was patched recent, tools there were clean. Edda folded her arms, watching the flames. No one in town will admit to knowing. They don't have to, I can find out. She studied him across the fire. Why are you doing this? He didn't answer right away. He turned the meat once, then sat back on his heels. I've seen what happens when people turn their backs, when they decide who matters and who don't. Girl like Delilah deserves better than that. Edda swallowed hard. So do boys like Dorian and Drew. Then we keep looking, Fletcher said. Drew stirred awake, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. Edda, my feet are cold. She crouched beside him, pulling the blanket tighter and brushing his dark hair from his forehead. We'll get you some new socks when we go back. Fletcher stood and walked to his saddlebag again. He came back with a pair of wool socks, worn but clean, and handed them to her. "They'll hold him a while," he said. She looked up at him, unsure how to take it. "They were my brothers," he added, his voice quiet. "He passed 2 winters ago. I kept them for no good reason." Edda took them, the weight of the gesture settling in her chest. "You sure?" "I wouldn't have offered if I wasn't." She didn't thank him. She just helped Drew pull them on. Later that morning, they broke camp. The sun had burned off most of the chill, and the scent of thawed earth rose with each hoofbeat. Edda rode beside Fletcher this time, the boys behind them on Bramble, Dorian holding the reins steady. Bear Creek sat in a shallow bend east of the ridge, where the cottonwoods hadn't leafed yet but the willows showed green tips. Fletcher dismounted first, scanning the area. Edda followed, eyes narrowing at the ground. "There," she said, pointing to a patch of crushed grass near a low stump. Fletcher knelt. Boot prints, 2 sets, one heavier, deeper at the toe. "Someone in a hurry," he nodded. "And carrying something." They followed the trail upriver where it curved into a ravine. The sun was higher now, casting long light through the trees. Dorian kept the boys back while Edda and Fletcher pushed forward. A rusted tin cup hung from a nail on an old pine, fresh wire strung across it. Fletcher stopped, eyes narrowing. "Signal?" Edda frowned. "For who?" He didn't answer. Just motioned for her to stay behind and slipped ahead. She waited, her breath tight in her throat. Then she heard it, a single bird call, too clean, too placed. Then Fletcher reappeared, mouth set grim. "There's a man up ahead, alone, watching the trail. He's got a Henry rifle and a mess of jerky laid out like he's been here a while. He one of Caldwell's, could be. He's not local, too clean. Looks like he's waiting for someone." Edda looked back at her brothers, then returned her gaze to Fletcher. "We draw him out." "No." "We wait." They crouched behind the stones, silent, patient. Edda's legs ached, but she didn't move. Fletcher didn't blink. After nearly an hour, a second rider approached from the east. The watcher stood, waved once, and the second man dismounted. Fletcher leaned in. "That's our answer." Edda's jaw tightened. "You recognize him?" He nodded once. "Name's Blevins. Rode with the Galesburg outfit till they got run out of Texas. He's been hiding since." They waited until the 2 men rode off together west toward the flatlands. Fletcher turned to her. "That's where Caldwell was headed. They're trying to cover his tracks." Edda stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Then we follow them." Fletcher met her eyes. "It won't be easy. They'll circle back, try to lose us." "I don't care." He studied her a moment longer, then reached for his reins. "Let's ride." They moved fast, the boys tucked close behind them. Edda didn't look back. She didn't need to. Everything she'd left behind had already changed. What lay ahead might not be safe, but it was honest, and Fletcher Greaves rode beside her like he meant to stay. By the time they reached the edge of the flats, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long blades of light over the dry grass. The trail they followed bent westward, skirting the base of low, dusky hills where the wind carried no birdsong, only the hush of distance and dust. Fletcher dismounted first and crouched beside a patch of churned soil. "They rode toward the butte," he said, brushing grit from his fingertips. "One of the horses is limping, right hind." Edda stood beside him, hands resting on the worn leather of her saddle. "They'll stop before nightfall," she said. "That horse won't carry far like that." He looked up at her. "There's a spring tucked behind that rise. If they know the land, that's where they'll hole up." She nodded once, then turned toward where the boys waited beneath a stand of scraggled juniper, Dorian holding Bramble's reins while Drew leaned against the saddle, his chin tucked into his arm. Both were quiet, the kind of quiet that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with watching the adults move with purpose. "I'll take them to the bluff," she said. "There's shelter enough behind the rock face. They'll be safe there while we go in. You trust Dorian to hold position? He's never run from anything," she said. "Not even when he should have." Fletcher gave a small nod. "Then we go soft, no shots unless we have to." She didn't answer, just turned to the boys. After guiding them to the bluff and showing Dorian how to keep low, she knelt to check Drew's blanket. "You stay put," she said gently. "No matter what you hear." The boy nodded, eyes wide but dry. She stood, adjusted the rifle on her shoulder and followed Fletcher through the waist-high grass. They moved without speaking, slipping between shadowed draws and over limestone ridges, until the ground began to dampen, and the scent of water threaded through the air. Fletcher held up a hand and pointed. Below them, tucked in a hollow of cottonwoods and stone, sat a fireless camp. One horse stood tethered, shifting uncomfortably, its right hind leg stiff with strain. Two figures sat on opposite sides of the spring, passing a bottle between them. One had a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, the other wore a red bandana knotted at his throat. From this distance, they looked relaxed. "Unworried, Blevins and the Watcher," Fletcher murmured. "No sign of Caldwell." Edda's jaw tightened. "He's nearby." Fletcher slid his rifle from his back and checked the sight. "We draw one away, whistle once from the east, I'll flank from the south." "I'm not losing them," she said. "You won't, but we don't need a shootout, just answers." She circled out wide, moving through a dry wash and up a ledge scattered with broken shale. When she reached position, she cupped her hands to her mouth and gave a sharp, single call like a hawk cutting wind. One of the men stood fast. The Watcher. He moved toward the sound, hand near his belt, unaware of the figure that stepped silently behind him. Fletcher pressed the barrel of his rifle to the man's spine. "Easy now." The Watcher froze. Fletcher disarmed him and motioned for Edda to join them. She came down the incline, boots sure on the slope. "Where's Caldwell?" she asked. The man hesitated. Fletcher gave him no time to consider. He pressed the stock of the rifle into his back. "He's not here," the man said. "We were waiting on him." "Where from?" "From the reservation road." "Said he had business to settle before he went south." Edda stepped closer. "Did he take money from anyone in town?" The man looked at her, then away. "He had a deal, that's all I know." Fletcher bound the man's hands with a leather strap and tied him to the cottonwood's base. Then he turned to Blevins, who hadn't moved from his seat, the bottle now resting between his boots. "You staying quiet for your own sake," Fletcher said. "Or his?" Blevins looked up, eyes bloodshot but not unfocused. "Don't matter now. Caldwell's not coming back." "He's gone west." "Gone where?" Edda asked. "Dead Horse Gap," Blevins said. "He's got a hideout near the pass. He won't stay long. He's looking to cross into Idaho before the marsh floods." Edda turned to Fletcher. "That's 2 days' ride. Less if we cut through the shale basin." "But it's rough country." "I can manage." He studied her a moment, then gave a slow nod. "We leave at first light." That night they camped near the bluff. Fletcher took first watch, his rifle across his knees as he sat on a flat rock above the fire's edge. Edda sat opposite, watching the boys sleep beneath the curve of the stone wall. "Dorian asked me if you were staying," she said after a while. Fletcher didn't turn. "And what you tell him?" "I said I didn't know, but I think I do now." He looked at her then, his eyes steady in the low light. "Is that what you want?" She didn't answer right away. She reached behind her, pulled one of Drew's spare blankets around her shoulders, then met his gaze. "I've spent years holding things together with nothing but will. And I know what breaks under pressure. And you don't move like something that breaks." He glanced back at the horizon where the stars were just beginning to scatter. "I didn't come here to stay. I didn't ask you to. But you want me to." She didn't flinch. "I want someone who'll stand when it gets hard, not just when it's righteous." Fletcher was quiet for a long time. Then, without looking away from the fire, he said, "I believe in you, Edda, not just what you saw. I believe in the way you don't turn back." She felt the words settle in her chest like something warm cracking through frost. He shifted, not closer but more open. "When this is done, I'll go if you ask. But if you don't," his voice caught, not from hesitation but from truth, "I'll stay." Edda's breath came slow. "I won't ask," she said, "but I might hope." And for the first time she let her fingers rest against the edge of his coat, just enough to feel the sure rhythm of his stillness. Fletcher didn't move away. The fire burned low and nothing more was said. But between them, something had already changed. Something that wouldn't be undone. Dead Horse Gap rose like a spine of broken stone against the flatland, jagged and steep where the land forgot to be gentle. The wind came colder here, swept down from the high country with a bite that carried snowmelt in distance. Edda pulled her coat tighter as she rode alongside Fletcher, the boys tucked warm and still beneath the oilskin tarp lashed to Bramble's saddle. They'd left them in the care of a prospector's widow who kept a shack near the river, crossing a woman with a scarred cheek and a shotgun who didn't ask questions once she saw the look in Edda's eyes. Fletcher had scouted ahead at dawn and now led them up a narrow draw where rock met brush in close angles. The trail was faint, no more than a set of tracks pressed into the frost-hardened mud, but they were recent. A boot heel had slipped near a bend, cutting deep into the clay. "He's moving lighter," Fletcher said, voice low as he studied the edge. "Not carrying as much. Means he's dropped something," Edda answered, scanning the slope above them. "Or someone." They climbed the ridge in silence, the horses breathing hard beneath them. Higher up, the trees grew thin, and the air carried the sharp scent of pine sap and iron. Just before midday, they came upon a clearing. A small lean-to, half buried in snow drift and shadow, stood beneath a bent cedar. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney. Fletcher dismounted without a word, rifle in hand. Edda followed, her boots crunching over frostbitten needles. Inside the lean-to, a man sat hunched beside a blackened stove, his boots off, one foot wrapped in cloth. His coat was thrown over a crate, and beside him sat a ledger bound in cracked leather. Caldwell. He looked up, startled, one hand jerking toward the pistol on the floor. "Don't," Edda said sharply, already leveling her rifle. He froze, sweat streaking his temple despite the cold. Fletcher stepped inside behind her. "You're done running," Caldwell's eyes flicked between them. "There's nothing to prove, you've no cause." Edda's voice was calm, even. "You signed Delilah Moore into your ledger, you marked her as delivered." His mouth opened, then closed again. "Who were you selling her to?" she asked. He didn't speak. Fletcher crossed the room and lifted the ledger. He flipped through the pages, then stopped. "There's names here," he said, his voice tight. "Dates, locations. Dalton Ridge isn't the first town." Caldwell's shoulders sagged. Edda felt her stomach twist. "You used the church to find them." "The families that had no one to ask questions," he said finally, voice low. "The ones already clinging by their fingernails. You preyed on them," Fletcher said. Caldwell didn't answer. They bound his hands and led him out into the cold. Fletcher tied his wrists to the saddle horn and mounted behind him, keeping pressure on the reins. They rode back through the basin, down the slope and across the flats with no words between them. When they reached the river shack, Edda saw Dorian waiting at the edge of the porch, his arms crossed, face drawn. "He tried to leave," he said before they fully stopped. "The man you left us with, he heard something in the trees and ran." I pulled the buckshot from her porch gun. Fletcher dismounted, eyes darting. "Anyone follow him?" "No," Dorian said, "but he won't be back." Inside, Drew sat curled on a cot beside the fire, the widow pouring hot water into a chipped basin with the same steadiness she'd shown before. Edda touched her shoulder. "Thank you." The woman gave a short nod. "He's yours. I knew you'd come back." They left Caldwell tied to the porch post while Edda and Fletcher stepped away, past the fence of bent willow and into the shadows of the trees where the wind couldn't reach. "He'll hang," she said. Fletcher nodded. "He should." She looked down at her hands, red from cold and rope burn. "I should feel something, relief, satisfaction maybe. You feel tired," he said, "and empty." Her eyes lifted to his. "You know that feeling?" He stepped closer but didn't touch her yet. "I've felt it after every fight that mattered." She drew a breath, long and quiet. "This land doesn't give anything easy." "No," he said, "but it gives it honest." Her hand found his, fingers rough and cold but sure. He didn't flinch, he let her hold on. "Will you stay?" she asked. He met her gaze, steady and quiet. "Yes. You're not asking for anything back." "I already got it," he said. "You let me in." There was no more to say. They returned to the shack together, where the boys waited and the fire burned steady. That night, while the moon rose over the basin and the trees whispered above them, Edda lay beside Fletcher on a bedroll near the hearth, one hand curled against his chest, his breath slow and warm beside her ear. No words passed between them, but nothing needed to. The girl was safe. The town would know the truth. And Edda Albright, once called a liar, had found someone who believed her and stayed. The snow came late that spring, a final breath of winter brushing across the hills outside Dalton Ridge. Fletcher stood at the edge of the Albright land, a bundle of fence posts slung across his shoulder and a coil of wire digging into his palm. He'd offered to help mend the south line when Edda mentioned the cattle had started pushing through again. She hadn't asked outright, but she'd looked at the pasture fence the same way she looked at the sky before a storm, quiet, expectant, but already preparing for what might follow. It had been 3 weeks since they'd brought Caldwell back. Long enough for the trial to come and go, for the townsfolk to shift from suspicion to silence. No one had apologized, but Edda hadn't expected them to. Justice had come, slow and reluctant, but it had come. Dorian trailed behind Fletcher now, carrying a hammer nearly too long for his arm, but determined not to complain. Fletcher waited while the boy set it down and blew into his hands. "You still thinking about that letter?" Fletcher asked, watching the boy's shoulders tighten. "It's from a school in Cheyenne," Dorian said after a moment. "They take boys young, teach 'em book things, languages, drawing maps." Fletcher nodded. "You want to go?" "I don't know, I'd miss her. She'd miss you too, but she'd let you go." Dorian dug the hammer's claw into the dirt. "I just don't want to leave her alone." "She wouldn't be." The boy didn't look up, but his hands stilled. "No, I guess she wouldn't." Back at the house, Edda wiped her hands on a cloth, the scent of lye soap still sharp in the air. Miss Cordy had taken Drew into town to visit Delilah, who was staying with the schoolteacher's sister for now. Edda had offered to keep her, but the girl wanted quiet, and Edda understood that without needing explanation. She stepped outside to see Fletcher and Dorian walking the fence line. Shadows stretched long behind them. Fletcher looked up and tipped his hat once, the smallest acknowledgement, but it settled something inside her she hadn't known was still shifting. That night she sat on the porch step, the lantern beside her flickering soft against the wood. Fletcher's boots crunched in the gravel as he approached, and he didn't wait for an invitation before sitting beside her. "I finished the fence," he said. "Found a gap near the creek bend." "I'll patch that in the morning," she nodded. "I can help. You've done enough today." They were quiet a while, the only sound the low whine of wind through the bare trees. Then Edda pulled a folded paper from her pocket and held it out. He took it without question, eyes scanning the words in the lamplight. "It's from the land office." Her voice was steady. "They've cleared the title. It's mine now, fully." Fletcher looked at her. "You want to keep it?" "I think I do. It's not much, but it's honest ground." "And it's ours." He folded the paper and handed it back. "Then we build on it." She reached for his hand, her fingers curling around his. "You sure?" "I've never been more." She didn't smile, just let her thumb brush over the back of his knuckles. Inside, Drew's boots thudded on the floorboards as he climbed into bed. Dorian's voice followed, low and even, reading aloud from one of the books Fletcher had brought back from town, a story about rivers and rail lines, and far-off places that held adventure instead of danger. Edda leaned her head against Fletcher's shoulder. "I never thought I'd have this." "You always had it in you," he said. "You just needed someone to help hold it steady." She looked up at him, the lantern light catching the faint line of a scar near his jaw. "You're not going to ride off in the night?" "No," he said. "I've done my share of leaving. I'd rather stay." She kissed him then, soft and certain, her hand slipping to the back of his neck, his breath warm against her cheek. It wasn't rushed or desperate, it was solid. Like the fence they'd built, like the land beneath their boots. Later, with the fire low and the wind quiet, they lay together beneath the quilt her mother had stitched long before the fever came. Fletcher's arm rested across her waist, his fingers curved gentle over her ribs. "I've got a name for the colt," he murmured. She blinked once, surprised. "You mean the one that kicked you last week?" He chuckled, low in his chest. "That one." "What name?" "Chance." She turned toward him. "Why?" "Because that's what you took on me." Edda didn't answer. She just pulled the quilt higher and wrapped her leg around his. By midsummer, the house had a new roof. and Dorian had left for Cheyenne with a satchel of books and a promise to write. Drew had taken to following Fletcher around the yard with a carved stick for a rifle, and the colt Chance had stopped kicking, though he still tested the fence twice a week. The townsfolk nodded now when they passed. Miss Cordy brought preserves every Sunday, and the schoolteacher began sending letters asking if Edda might consider helping teach the younger children during harvest months. Fletcher built her a bench beneath the cottonwood tree behind the house, and every evening they sat there, boots touching, watching the sun slide low behind the ridge. They never spoke of what might have been different. They had no need, they had this. A home built by hands that had known loss. A love made of quiet strength. And a life that, after everything, felt like it had always been waiting just beyond the last bend in the trail.